Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Megan Easley-Walsh, and this is History Stories. With a PhD in history, as an author, a writing consultant, and editor, my life is full of history and stories. With that in mind, this podcast's goal is to explore some of those stories of history. This will include diving into antiques and interesting historical artifacts that I've found, looking behind the scenes at inspiration for my novels, taking a peek at places I visited, and uncovering new topics of interest. Thank you for joining me. Let's begin. In the first 3 episodes of History Stories, we've looked at behind-the-scenes stories related to the history and inspiration of my first 3 novels and my doctoral thesis. If you haven't listened to them yet, you might want to check them out. In episode 1, we talked about the French Resistance, my novel Flight Before Dawn, and my time spent at World War II sites in France. In the second episode, we discussed the transformative power of art, my experiences at World War I sites and the Maginot Line, and Edward's changing life in my novel What Edward Heard. In the most recent episode, we talked about the year 1884, the power of peaceful international conferences, and my novel Meridian. Navigation played an important role in that episode. For many in the world of literature, Shakespeare is an important explorer into the world of English and the enduring legacy of characters and stories. According to the website shakespeare.org.uk, he was the first person to record over 1,700 words in English, and most likely invented many of these words. They include everything from bedroom to downstairs to eyeball and puppy dog. And while today we may think he's very traditional, he in fact was the first person to use the word traditional, as well as manager and kissing. Now, I'll employ another of Shakespeare's words, hurry, and we'll hurry on our way into this week's stories. This week marks Shakespeare celebrations around the world. Recently, at an antiques fair, I found a book from the 18th century that is a volume of Shakespeare. It is a book that my character Rebecca, in Across the River, might have had in her home before she ran away. Why did she run? A bit like Juliet, whom Rebecca has been reading about in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, her family didn't approve of the man she fell in love with. Rebecca is the daughter of a lord, and Caleb is a cabinet maker. He's perfectly respectable, but not at all fit for the daughter of the lord. They decide not to let this stop them, and Rebecca proposes that they fund their future by stealing her inheritance, silver plates, and hiding them in the river. Rebecca's idea was inspired by a story that my grandfather used to tell me about our own family plates. They weren't made of silver, but instead pewter. There weren't many details in the story, but the thing that I most remember is that pewter plates were hidden in a river and later retrieved. I have never seen those plates, but I began to picture them, and, as I mentioned in the first episode of this podcast, a story began to steep like tea in a teapot. In my novel Across the River, Rebecca's journey does not go according to her plans, and she is soon drawn into revolution on both sides of the Atlantic. As the year is 1774, there's a powder keg of independence awaiting ignition and a storm brewing. Speaking of stormy weather, The Tempest is one of the plays in the volume of Shakespeare that I found at the Antiques Fair. In Act 2, Scene 1 of The Tempest, Antonio says, quote, "What's past is prologue," end quote. That line is the perfect bridge between literature and history. In other words, it's a line that truly incorporates history stories. When I first began my blog several years ago, from a time when blogs were more independent of websites, I named it Past is Prologue. Shakespeare's line is also inscribed in the National Archives building in Washington, D.C. The importance of that line to historians is that the past continues to inform the present. As the writer William Faulkner said, quote, "The past is never dead. It's not even past," end quote. I think in our own lives we can all recognize that choices we made yesterday impact us today. Lives are composed of many moments and many decisions. Like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, the choices that are made impact the outcomes. That is necessarily true then for the larger scale as well. What has happened up until this point doesn't lock us into the future, but it does influence it. History matters. It is important to be informed about the past, but that doesn't mean a mere recitation of what has been written for eons. It means a continued curiosity to include a greater plurality of voices. Different perspectives enrich history. Expanded source material provides a more complete picture. A tapestry of a single color is a bolt of cloth, but a tapestry that is allowed to spring to life with the full complement of color and texture is a work of art. And so it goes for history as well. A monolith, that is, a single perspective of history, is often a static thing, a relic that has no mystery, no intrigue, no interest. A panoply of voices is dynamic, engaging, and continues to provoke curiosity and new avenues of discovery. That is history at its best. In my novel Across the River, Rebecca encounters life apart from what she's used to. She befriends men she never would have met in her ordinary life, and she begins to wonder if perhaps that is what is meant by true democracy. Perhaps it is traitorous for the daughter of a lord to entertain notions of revolutionary ideas. But Rebecca is stepping away from the world she grew up in to embrace her truth. Her world literally enlarges from behind the walls of a sheltered home to the countryside of England, the high seas of the Atlantic, and beyond. I won't spoil it here for you, but suffice it to say that Rebecca's own journey is paralleled in the world around her. To quote Shakespeare again, this time from his play As You Like It, from Act 2, Scene 7, quote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts," end quote. Rebecca's world became a stage for her life, a place to enact her growing knowledge, and her embrace of new ideas and new friendships. For history, an inclusion of plurality of voices enriches the subject and our understanding. Perhaps we should ask ourselves, what is the play that we're creating for the future to enact on our stage? Is it one of tolerance? One of hope? Thank you for joining me for this episode of History Stories. To find out more about my writing and my research, visit me at meganeasley-walsh.com, and you can find my novel Across the River on Amazon. I look forward to sharing more history stories with you in the next episode.